people who've been attached to the same kind of job for the last 20, 30 years and are unable to step out of that attachment because basically they have become the mask that they had to wear to go to work for the last 20 to 30 years, and they cannot escape out of that role. It's like Muhammad Ali used to say, I'd be terrified of a man who thinks exactly the same ways about the things he used to believe 30 years ago, because there's no growth.
Hey, it's Jen, and welcome to this week's episode of How to Diplomat. You just heard Carlos reveal a truth that most professionals avoid confronting. That we can become so attached to our job titles, we forget we have the power to change. And then you heard him quote Muhammad Ali about the courage required for real growth. I'd be terrified of a man who thinks exactly the same ways because there's no growth. You're transitioning, not denouncing your previous self. This wisdom comes from someone who's lived that transition in the most challenging way possible, by giving up his established career to support his partner's dreams. Carlos, like thousands of accompanying spouses around the world, faced an impossible choice. Stay behind and maintain his career, or follow his wife, a Canadian diplomat, and start over professionally again and again with every new posting. He chose love and reinvention. Many people assume that diplomatic spouses enjoy a kind of extended vacation, but the reality can actually be a lifetime of being patronised at embassy functions, having your expertise dismissed, letting your career ambitions just wither away, and often feeling profoundly isolated and lonely in countries where you have no professional or personal network. But Carlos presents a remarkable and inspiring alternative. By releasing his attachment to traditional career paths, he found the freedom to build something entirely new. A portfolio career that has taken him from UNESCO programs in Ecuador to World Bank initiatives to senior policy roles across multiple Canadian government departments. Today he's going to share with you how professional reinvention isn't about abandoning who you are. It's about discovering who you can become. You'll learn why the strongest careers are built on core interests rather than job titles, how to maintain your professional identity while adapting to completely new contexts, and the relationship philosophy that turns geographical challenges into opportunities for deeper connection. This is a hope for anyone who's ever felt their career was held hostage by circumstances beyond their control. Carlos proves that with the right mindset, sacrifice can be your greatest competitive advantage. Let's dive in. Well, Carlos, thank you so much for joining me today on the pod. Where are you calling from?
Oh, Jane, it's a pleasure to chat with you. I am in Singapore. I've been here
Nice.
for about the last 14 months.
And you are what's known in the business as a trailing spouse, which I never think is, well, particularly flattering, first of all, and never really, I don't think, does justice to what it's actually like. How would you better characterise your role as the spouse of a serving diplomat?
Well, this is a very unforgiving type of position, as you well know, because there is, in fact, two jobs and one career. So I generally describe myself as the other half of Rain's career, my wife's name. That's from performing, doing the good is now as the second half of a career, of a foreign service career. But I try not to really introduce myself either here or anywhere else as the spouse of somebody, because that immediately assumes that, you're sort of what I call the Marsupial identity. In other words, you have to be in someone's pouch to be accepted by the rest of the pack or the other society at large. And, we're not marsupials. We don't really depend on our partners to that extent. We're kind of independent units, but at the same time, we play a role and fulfill a number of things that are necessary to be fulfilled. Mostly, as you know, when you move to a place overseas, there's a million things that you have to do from a logistics standpoint. While your working spouse goes away and works, you have to deal with the country where you are and set everything up and deal with regulations and so on. So that's, depending on the place where you are based, that can be something relatively easy to do to something very complex, dealing with a number of suppliers and so on. So it's that kind of integration work that you have to do. I don't have children, but for those who do have children, they also have to deal with the school system and whatnot. So there's all these sort of supporting roles that you play that are kind of in the background, because it's not the employer that does it, it's the spouse. But because it's the existence here is tied to the employer's decision to send your spouse overseas. Therefore, you are also part of that mission without necessarily receiving any support while you're carrying out that mission. So it's in some ways we are much more when I am a spouse. I've seen this when I'm an employee, but when I'm a spouse, I am much more in touch with the local realities than when I am an employee. Because when I'm an employee, basically, I hardly have any contact with the place where I'm living because I'm basically concentrating on the work and not on really necessarily understanding where I'm based and the particularities of the place where I am working at.
I like your marsupial philosophy. Did you develop that philosophy over time, or was it something that you had thought about prior to the first posting that you went on together?
No, I think that you see when you're in this kind of line of work, as you know, you meet all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of marriage situations too. I know personally one couple who have been separated for 11 years. I mean, they are married, they are a couple, but they don't live in the same country because he wanted to pursue his career and she wanted to pursue hers. So they came to an agreement to, meet somewhere in the middle. Somewhere along the road, they managed to have children and so forth. They are separated. And this has been going on for 11 years. I knew others who are in that kind of situation and every shade in between. So you tend to see different kinds of arrangements that are not typical arrangements, and people who are not in this kind of situation will have a hard time understanding. But it's more a function of a scale of dependency, if you like. In other words, if there's in the old days, spouses were completely dependent on the. And I find that for me, at first, I didn't really see those things. It took me a bit of a learning curve to understand those situations. The first few years were, more about understanding what was my motivation, if it was really worth staying in the relationship given the situation that I was heading into. So I had to really kind of examine certain priorities carefully. It's something that I recommend to people before they go overseas, because if unbalanced, the analysis is not really on the plus side, then whatever situation they carry with them, it will magnify itself once you're a post. And so that's when breakdowns happen very quickly. So and that requires understanding that no bond is unbreakable.
So, by the sounds of it, you've applied quite a scientific approach to gathering metrics on your relationship and your kind of life goals. So for both of you, it sounds like, your careers are really important to you. Your relationship is really important to you. How can we define our relationship that allows us also to feel fulfilled in our careers in a way that's not damaging to the relationship? How do we make them not mutually exclusive?
The best science is poetry, right? I mean, you
Okay.
really have to. Yeah, you can't really do that without having something of yourself, whether it's analyzed in a specific issue or parts of your life that are important. You have to put your heart into it. Your heart guides you. It's your intuition. It's your internal compass, and that's actually really the only thing that remains of any relationship. If there is no feelings, you can construct whatever you want. It's just a bunch of agreements. But it's the heart that's really the glue that binds those agreements, and it's that brings you to a place where you can say, well, I feel that it's still worth it because of the heart still saying yes, not because I'm a marsupial who needs the pouch, but because the more I step away, the more I understand, well, this is a special connection that I have with this other human being. And it's not about perfection, it's about understanding. So it's not about putting things in a spreadsheet and say, okay, this is this way, this is the other way, and calculate the balance. But it's more about what's my understanding of my role in everything that I do. So whether I am, supporting a certain area or just doing my work, it's all part of the same, because I'm contributing to the relationship, but I'm contributing in different ways, and so is my spouse. We're not trying to mirror each other's actions. She has her own ways of contributing, and I have my ones.
But you also came to epiphany is probably a bit of a dramatic word, but you also concluded that proximity wasn't a core necessary part.
I've seen many people in relationships that live in the same house, but they might as well live on different planets. I mean, there's no correlation between being close to somebody physically and being close to somebody emotionally, or being willing to grow with that person in any kind of relationship. So that's not really a defining feature of what you want to have. And it's obvious that you can see that. So I don't measure the intensity or the quality of the relationship by the degree of physical separation. I think more in terms of what am I contributing. I enjoy the fact that I'm not trying to follow a certain prefabricated approach to certain things. This takes you to the issue of adaptability, right? Because when you go, is really the key word is adaptability. It's not that you're strong or that you're weak, it's that you're adaptable. It's not that you're firm or you're elastic. It's more that how you.
Mm-hmm. I think I have seen with multiple families, whether it's couples or with children as well, I think that newness arriving at a place can probably expose fractures that are already there, or conversely have the completely opposite effect. You know, the excitement of exploring something new together can actually build bonds too. You have had such a tremendously interesting and varied career. Do you think you would have had that kind of career had you not been married to a diplomat?
I did gymnastics when I was younger. So I did represent the country overseas. I did travel as a sports person a lot, so I thought that it was a great way to know places and know people. So maybe I would have done something similar. I think that people can also learn. I don't think that life in foreign service is something that you're born to. I think you need to be trained, because there's a number of things that are unique to this kind of life that we need to be mentored or trained, or be willing to learn from the experiences that you see around you.
Oh, like what? What kind of skills, or what do you think you need to be taught?
For anything from learning to read a room, to learning to approach strangers or be approached by strangers, to understanding unspoken norms of behavior, to adapting quickly to places where you may not speak the language, and having to pick up certain clues that are very useful to avoid problems or to be in the good graces of people. Basic interactions that are not the same. To the market here is not the same as going to the market in Europe, and so on. So there's a number of those, if you like, behavioral adaptability patterns that you need to develop quickly, which allow you to, know whether you are in the right situation or not. So the other thing is, when you are working, if you're going to work in an environment, like when you're an employee, for instance, maybe you're working out of an embassy or whatever, but the local engaged staff is completely different between countries. And you really need to learn to read that situation very quickly. Otherwise, there's a lot of risk of having all kinds of misunderstandings and all kinds of awkward situations that can quickly escalate.
Yeah. Just as you were speaking about going shopping, grocery shopping and market shopping is completely different. It just prompted a memory. I got used to, when I was in Pakistan, I got used to haggling for everything, anything and everything you haggled for, they'd say this is the price and you're like, are you sure? And then you kind of, and then the first time I'd come back to the UK for a breather break, I went into the store and,
Oh my God.
buy something. And they're like, it's whatever it was. And I just, without even thinking, I was like, are you sure? I'm sure you could do better than that. To the point where I was nearly thrown out by the security guard before I remembered. You've been doing all sorts of interesting things. You're in academia, public policy, World Bank. You mentioned the UN. So when people kind of ask you what you do, how do you begin to answer it?
Oh, man, that's well, it depends on who's asking, right?
Hmm.
That's the first thing. And it depends on the context, because sometimes people are interviewing you for jobs without you being aware of it. So again, you have to have your radar. I know that a couple of times when I've been here, they were auditioning me for a job that they had in mind, but they weren't telling me. So I knew sort of who was asking, what my interlocutor was thinking of, and then you answer accordingly. If they're looking for the three areas where I really know, just the sociology of learning and public policy and all the digital transformation that goes in between those two fields. Those are the three spaces where I really gravitate. Then you need to kind of read what your interlocutor asking you, and then you say, well, right now I'm concentrating on this, I'm concentrating on that. And so rather than giving them a finalized picture, I allow them to finalize the picture.
That's very diplomatic of you. You breadcrumb a little bit and see what the response is, and then you give them a little bit more. Oh, very, very clever.
And if people want to know more about you, they will ask. If they don't want to know, they'll turn away.
They won't. Yeah.
Whether you are, briefing a minister or you are just speaking with your neighbor, if they want to know more, they'll come back and they'll ask for it.
Yeah, I agree. Just give them the bare bones and breadcrumb it and see what happens next.
Yeah, and avoid being typecast. They need to avoid being typecast. It takes away from you being immediately put into a category from which you cannot escape.
You've got pillars of a profession. You talked about sociology and the digital transformation and everything in between. But in essence, I think every time you move, you sort of reinvent yourself. Have you got a kind of playbook that you've developed about how you locate and find new roles in the new destinations that you go to? Is there a framework that you follow?
That's really a function of the local job market. The way to approach that for me is to really look at the local conditions of the local job market. That's the first thing. And if I see that there's really no way for myself to find a way into that local job market, then now that we have a lot of digital technologies, you can work with other people overseas in a number of capacities. What I did was that, because I was in and out of public policy as a senior advisor, then I was in and out of the UN system also as a senior policy advisor, and then I was getting my qualifications. I was able over time to build a career in field assignments that may or may not be close to where my spouse was, and that are the building blocks of my CV. But you keep some of those, your core areas of interest in such a way that you can segment them and look towards areas that in country A might be more compatible, say one aspect, but then in country B is another aspect. So in my case, I was able to get experiences in all three areas. So over time, you are able to not be selective, but you can cast a really wide net. Mm-hmm. Pretty much every job that you're looking for is going to have a component that you already have in your experience.
Mm-hmm. I really like this. I think so many people worry that not only spouses who have had to pivot a little bit every time they follow their spouse, but I think people who perhaps follow opportunities for growth or follow their passions or follow different interests, they sort of look at their CV and gosh, they worry that they're not linear, that their CV is a bit squiggly. But I think I was going to ask your advice to those people, that how they tell the story to a future employer about that, or are you saying that you actually rewrite your CV depending on the circumstances and bring out bits that you think are most relevant to your host country or your
There's a core of your CV that includes your emotional CV as well. In other words, the thing that you really like doing. That's your core areas. And those core areas can be divided in many ways. So if I'm pivoting away from, maybe I used to be, let's say I used to work as a welder, but then I realized that the country where I'm going, there's no possibility of me working there because I cannot have the license. but you can use what you have in a different way. A lot of people get wedded to their work selves, and they forget that it's not about your job, it's about your profession. Those are two different things. And so when I don't do the same job that I was doing before, it's like I feel deprived of my professional identity, which is not true. My professional identity is that I'm an expert on big picture stuff. I like big picture stuff. I like to think. I like to write. And I like to see people working together. That's my core interest. How those things manifest themselves? Nowadays, they're manifesting in the academic realm. I'm advising people. I'm showing them what it means like to learn how to publish, showing them what it means to learn how to write, develop your own creative voice. I'm showing them that it's a lot more than what the textbook is telling you because of the experience I have. I enjoy engaging with people who have different views and from other fields. We work together, but it's all comes from my core interests. I have not walked away from that. I did not decide to become a medical doctor. I did not decide to become a pastry expert. Not because I cannot do it, but because it's not part of my core interest.
That's such good advice. I get approached quite a lot by civil servants, quite a lot with my previous employer, who want to leave. The time has come, they want to do something else. But they say, I don't know, what do you think I could do with all of my skills and experience? I'm such a generalist, I could do anything. What do you think? How do I package up my skills to do the next thing? And I keep saying, with the greatest of respect, that's the wrong question. What do you want to do? The fact that you're a generalist means that you've got buckets of skills to sell to an employer no matter what you want to do. But you have to actually, maybe for the first time in your life, think about what lights you up, what you want to do, and then find the experience from your vast library of experiences in your diplomatic career to kind of underpin that and sell you.
The people who are asking for career advice regarding how they can use their previous stuff into a new career, it's like asking me to find the light that is supposed to light up their own road. They have to carry that light. I don't have it for them. Okay, I like doing everything. Well, that's not possible. There has to be a hierarchy of things that you like doing. And those hierarchy of things, there are all kinds of possibilities for you to work on. But if you're afraid of really looking into your own self and asking yourself these questions, if you're not prepared to take that step, and there's no amount of CV writing or coaching or gymnastics of the mental kind that's going to resolve that, because you're really dealing with attachment issues. It's people who've been attached to the same kind of job for the last 20, 30 years and are unable to step out of that attachment because basically they have become the mask that they had to wear to go to work for the last 20 to 30 years, and they cannot escape out of that role. Well, it's over. That performance is over.
I agree. And it's, by the sounds of it, you've gone through the process. I've gone through the process, and it's deeply uncomfortable. It's deeply uncomfortable to examine all of that stuff and ask yourself the really hard questions. And particularly, I think when you get to a certain age, you think that you're supposed to have it all sorted out. You've got life figured out. You can maybe feel you've got to a point in your career where I should be happier, I should be more fulfilled. But you forget that what you wanted at 20 or 30 is not the same, because you've changed as a person. And it's actually okay to say, do you know what? I've had a great innings so far, but actually time has come to try something else, and that's okay.
Yeah. It's like Muhammad Ali used to say, I'd be terrified of a man who thinks exactly the same ways about the things he used to believe 30 years ago, because there's no growth. Yeah. So if I'm unable to identify that growth, then what am I going to do? People think that they're supposed to break with their previous existence and start a new one. No, it's a transition. You are transitioning to something else. Who cares?
Yeah.
You're here now. You can decide to give it a shot, and the consequences will be the same level of reward that you would have when you were 20, but you will have all these other experiences, so maybe you will enjoy it even more. That extra step is about transitioning. And if people are not prepared to do that, to step out of their marsupial pouch, where we're comfortable, we're happy, where everything is taken care of for us, then we have a problem, because there's no growth. And this requires growth, not just an intellectual analysis, but also understanding that you're not the same person emotionally as you were back in the day, and it's okay
to let that go.
or give it a new meaning. You can treasure those things, but they have a new meaning now. You can treasure the previous years and whatever you built, but now they mean something else because they're going to take you somewhere else, and that's fine.
If you had to design a policy for how governments support diplomatic families or spouses, what would that look? I think you already have you not?
The big issue is about the reality that a lot of marriages or spousal unions break up. It's just kind of a fact of life. And what's not really acknowledged oftentimes is that one of the members of the couple had primary caregiving responsibilities, had to raise the family, whatnot. And that person missed a lot of years of their economic productive years because they were using their economic productive years in other things. The governments do not recognize that those years that were given, literally, as a subsidy to the employer in exchange to having an employee working and being somewhat happy at post and whatnot. So to me, the key issue is that spouses who really stay, go posting after posting, and let's say after a threshold of a number of years, I don't know, could be 5, could be 10, they should have those years credited as a pensionable income. They should receive an annuity so that at the end of the career, they have their own resources. And they would not be relying on the spousal resources alone.
I think that's such a good point. If you think about all the hidden things that a spouse does, speaking from experience, my husband, well, he retrained to do something completely, pivoted completely from his career because of the fact on the ground was that he was going to be able to do what he did before. As you say, so many spouses around the world do all that unpaid work and then sort of pop out the other end with nothing really to show for it, I suppose.
Yeah, basically you're left with not even a ring or a watch, nothing.
Yeah.
So that, by the time that's not a problem, like you said, when you're 25, but when you're 55 is a big problem. To not recognize that service, to simply ignore it, pretend that it's the part of the package, and it's just assumed that you ought to forfeit your entire lifetime earnings because, if that's what you joined for. No, that's not what you joined for. So therefore, there must be, and I'm not talking about, any extraordinary compensation, just some kind of guaranteed income that will allow them to, at the end of those years of service, not to feel that they are basically left literally on the street and that they have no resources of their own, because they move a lot. They're always rotating. I know that in Canadian military families, they might rotate every 2 years and then on and on and on. Well, so that extra burden that is not borne by most people in society should be recognized, should be acknowledged, and should be compensated to a reasonable extent. Say, thank you for your service. Not just a little medal, but something concrete that you can say, well, yeah, the government recognizes that, yes, I too make sacrifices.
What's the best piece of advice you ever received as a spouse?
Oh, in what area specifically we're talking about?
I don't know. I mean, even just most memorable or ridiculous, I suppose. Just, did anyone offer you advice about how to be a good diplomatic spouse?
Yeah, I guess I got the mundane, stay away from that house because the kind of parties that go around there you don't really want to know.
Why would I not want to be part of that?
Exactly. I remember that sort of advice that's really not an advice. It's more like inciting you to do things. The others are more like, just basic things like there's any number of local issues that the list of do's and don'ts. You can only get that once you are at post. I'd say I had it maybe 50% of the time because there's, as you know, there's some posts where they are very toxic and the people who are there are toxic and they are not at all helpful. In fact, I was told in a couple of occasions, how is it that you have a job? Are you supposed to be at home? By both men and women, foreign service officers. So it wasn't, a gender specific thing because they clearly resented that I was not, I guess, in the stereotype or, just being like they thought that their spouses are supposed to be acting or behaving, I don't know, or whatever issues they had at home.
Gosh.
They were just projecting onto me. So there's postings like that. And so at those places, I never got any useful advice about anything. But,
Yeah.
that's when the
Who
adaptability
did
part
you
comes in.
who did you think you were getting a role independently of your spouse, Carlos? I mean,
Yeah. Oh, you hear that. And I mean, I still hear rumblings like that. It's 2025. I'm still hear that kind of rumblings. People who, they think that they are, because I'm a spouse, they are inherently superior to me because they are the employees.
you'd be somewhere and you'd be talking to a spouse, and then someone else would come and, they would wheedle out
Mm-hmm.
our various hierarchical levels,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
they would identify that this person would be just a spouse, and they'd be completely dismissed. I
Yeah.
would be kind of a little bit more interesting depending on where I was in the hierarchical level, but the spouse was just completely dismissed. Subhuman, not interested, you're of no use to me. And it was just very, very uncomfortable.
And the employer sends messages too, like I mentioned in that article where I referenced, I just wrote, in particular case of Canadian embassies or high commissions overseas, being a spouse does not grant you entry to the embassy premises. You have to request it. You get a badge that lets you in, which of course is ridiculous because it identifies you as a spouse. So right there is like he's not really one of us.
That's your badge.
but
That's
at
your
least
marsupial pouch.
Exactly, but at least I can get in the embassy. But
Mhm.
in many cases, like right now here in Singapore, I have to go to two or three security checks to try to see my wife, and that nobody knows you at post because those people are always working there. So nobody sees your face. So you cannot interact with them. So even if there is maybe a locally engaged position that might be open for someone well qualified, they don't know me. Whereas when I was at the World Bank, the very first thing that happened was that I got my fingerprints on my face and all that, scanning. And then immediately my wife gets a badge exactly like mine with the same access to every building, to every facility. It doesn't say staff, it doesn't say spouse, it just has her name. If we wanted to have lunch, it would be an issue just walking up literally to my office and say, hey, let's go have lunch. If it was something, that kind of comfort level, that kind of trust in the spouse is something that, I have to say that the Canadian government, for some weird reason, thinks that the guy who delivers the drinking water to the embassy premises, has access to all of the rooms because they have to leave the water bottles, is more trustworthy and reliable than the spouses. So that's
quite right. You never
both
know what
messages.
you lot might get up to when you're in there.
Yeah, exactly.
That reminds me, actually. So, as you know, we live in a boarding school. I've got a pass, but the pass isn't activated. So I'm not allowed into any of the buildings. I'm just allowed to kind of wander around outside.
The homeless parent.
Mr. Upton's wife. So,
Right.
and as we were talking earlier, I'm familiar with that. Well, yes, I'm Mr. Upton's wife, but I'm also got
Myself.
my own identity. Yes, I am. Yeah, I am a separate person. What was your best posting and why?
Probably Washington, D.C., because I was at the World Bank at the time, and I had a really, really wide berth. I would check out with my boss once a month, literally, and he's like, "What are you up to?" I was like, "Well, this and this." Okay, but I
Amazing.
mean, I would be just doing all kinds of stuff. I was everywhere and nowhere at the same time because I was really working with all kinds of parts of the bank and all that, and I created a really vast network of people that I could work with in and out of the institution. So it gave me good opportunities. I think I was the only one who was able to negotiate a public grant directly from the U.S. government into the bank. And I was sent to deal with, it was that USAID. And there were 4 American guys on one end of the table. There was me on the other side of the table. I said, you guys just don't beat me up, all right? So whatever you do, don't get mad at me when you negotiate. So they kind of laugh it off. And we were able to build a negotiating relationship that in the end, resulted in a very, very large amount of money being transferred. But I would tell my boss, Bob, I said, Bob, I'm negotiating this thing, doing. I'll let you know when it's done. When it was done, he was like, Bob got to sign the MOU and I get to be in the background just clapping. But that kind of work was very rewarding to me because I was really,
You basically summed up diplomacy. You do all that work for months and months and months, and then your boss or your political masters come in and do the signing, and you're in the background clapping, like, well done me, well done me. I think a lot about failure and fear of failure. It constrains quite a lot of creative and innovative policy making. But then I was thinking, but actually failure in foreign policy terms can mean catastrophic failure, do you know? And so I was kind of pondering about where the balance is. Like, you only get better if you fail, but if you fail, it can be catastrophic. So how, in your perspective, how do you balance?
When I left the UN, I was the deputy director for one of the UNESCO regional offices, and so I was used to really running my shop and all that. And I go back to government, and it was like, no, you got like 10 layers on top of you, and you can't do anything. Regimental existence based on fear of making mistakes, so that if you make mistakes, somebody's going to be blamed, and I don't want that person to be me. And so that's how the layers operate, right? So it's a chain of extreme risk aversion, extreme lack of innovation, extreme lack of intrinsic motivation. Even though their normal discourse, they keep hammering that you have to be innovative, that you have to be motivated, and that you have to be creative in what you do. So, which is, well, in fact, they're rewarding the exact opposite behaviors. Also, people who fail up, people who make huge mistakes and they get promoted. Some there's people who are like that. And you go like, how is this clown in this position now? Well, that happens. I was also very attentive to what people were telling me, because it was basically my neck on the line. So I had to make sure that, because I only got one, that I ended up chopped off. I noticed that there's a paradox in my case. I don't know if it works with other people, but the more leeway I was given, in fact, the better it was, because I knew that at the end of the day it was me on the line, and therefore, if it worked, the benefit was going to be for everybody. But if it didn't work, it was just going to be a kind of a limited impact that would revert back to me, but not in a way that would be self-destructive, but it will be in a way that I could learn from it. You really need to learn to exercise that sort of adaptability and judgment, and understand what are really the parameters what you're doing. And you learn that quickly, really. But if they leave you alone, if you are constantly being chaperoned, or if you have somebody constantly looking over your shoulder, or somebody always sort of planting the doubt about what you're doing, then the risk of failing is actually higher. We make the same mistakes over and over again, whether it's in the program or it's in a specific set of measures, or if we are trying to negotiate some agreement, we go back to those agreements and we keep making the same mistakes that previously, because we're not really learning, because we're not allowed to learn. There is a risk in not letting people fail, because we don't learn when we're not failing. We really learn when we make mistakes. That's how we get our feedback.
Yeah. So when you think about your amazing journey, your career, the postings, the marriage, the reinventions, what's the story you want to leave people with? Like, what's your reflection if you look back on it all?
I just want people to know that we're doing this for service, not to get rich. We really, it's number one. But if you think that a couple of drinks and some cheesy party with some people are supposed to be the be-all of your life, then you're completely wrong. And that we believe that we can make a difference in what we do. We're here not to do a job. This is not a job. It's a vocation. You have to really want to do it. And if it's not for you, that's fine. And for people who are starting this career, you will know in the first 5 years if it's not for you. Leave. That's fine. It's because all this trash that comes with it, all these problems I just outlined, all these problematic issues and so on, they're not going away. You are going to have to deal with them with your family throughout your career. Whether you can change that, that's a different story. But those issues and those conditions will be there. So as soon as you see that that's not maybe the cup of tea that you wanted, then that's when you need to ask those questions. Should I or should I not? It's not the end of the world if you decide that it's not for you. And, we're not joining a priesthood. We're not joining some kind of cult. We are professionals.
It can feel like a cult. It can totally feel like a cult. But yes, you can't leave. Nobody's going to hunt you down. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was fascinating insight.
It's great to chat with you.
3 things struck me about Carlos's approach to professional reinvention. First, that accountability paradox. The more leeway you give capable people, the better they perform because they know they're truly responsible for outcomes. Most leaders think more oversight equals better results, but Carlos convincingly argues the opposite. This week, try giving your best performers more autonomy, not less. Second, that lovely marsupial identity insight. We're not dependent on our partners or indeed our job titles or employers for professional validation, but we can still build careers that complement rather than compete. Carlos showed how to maintain your core professional identity while adapting to new contexts. That's the difference between pivoting and abandoning your expertise. But the real game changer for me was his 5-year rule. You'll know if foreign service life is for you within 5 years, and if it's not, leave. That's not just about for diplomatic careers, that's about any role that demands total commitment. How many of us stay in situations long past their expiration date because we're afraid to admit they're not the right fit anymore? Carlos's pensionable service proposal for trailing spouses could literally change government HR policies. Sometimes the most innovative solutions are the simplest ones, and they come from people who've lived the problem firsthand. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, and/or found it insightful, like, follow and subscribe. I also write more deeply about what I learned from my interviewees, along with insights from my 20+ years as a diplomat and army officer in my weekly newsletter, Diplomatic Dispatches. Contact details and subscription details are in the show notes below.